there's unsubscribes that you're losing that you could easily keep if you just, focused on creating relevant messaging at a manageable level of pressure. Welcome to the State of CRM podcast. I'm Matt.
I'm Ben.
And today we're going to talk about a topic that actually a lot of you have been really interested in. We've covered it in various ways over the last year or so. We've had a couple dedicated podcasts directly to it, and a lot of you have mentioned that this is an interesting topic. So we're revisiting it today in a little bit of a different lens, and the topic is unsubscribes. And as we know, or as we've talked about, there are a couple of ways to address or mitigate your unsubscribe rate. One is to ensure that your messages and your campaigns are relevant to the audience that's receiving them. And the other is keeping an eye on pressure. And we'll talk a little bit about pressure versus fatigue, because fatigue is ultimately what you're looking to reduce. But pressure is the way that you manage that. And so I think maybe a good way to kick it off is just to talk a little bit, Ben, about what the difference between pressure and fatigue is. It's something we've mentioned, before, but it's probably good to dive into it a bit again.
Yeah. That's if you look back in the older podcasts and episodes, we had that topic covered. But yeah, fatigue and pressure are usually often used one for each other or considered the same. Even in some platforms, for one platform, the term fatigue appear, and for another platform that will be pressure. The thing is that doesn't mean the same thing. The pressure, that's super easy to understand and to calculate, because that's the number of message or touch points per user for a given period.
Yep.
So that's usually what we see everywhere in different platforms and marketing clouds. The fatigue can't be reflected in the marketing cloud or in your tool, because that's really reflecting how each individual will receive the message you are sending. So it's not because I'm receiving 5 messages and you, Matt, you are receiving 5 messages. So our pressure will be the same for a given period, but the fatigue might be different because you have maybe more interest in some of the topic that we received, if we receive the same messages. And maybe that's me with really a very good affinity or propensity to react to enjoy the content that I'm receiving out of these 5 messages, and that's not at all your topic of predilection or something that you're expecting. And so we'll have the same fatigue but different, same pressure but different fatigue, and that's basically the difference. And so the first thing is really to be clear on the fatigue is at the individual level and can be different for the same message received. Pressure is just number of message received for every of your customers.
And fatigue is sort of an emotional response to your point, Ben, which is why for each and every person, each individual, and we'll talk a little bit about why that's a key thing is different for any given set of campaigns. So there's really, we mentioned it a little bit in the introduction, but there's really 2 key ways that you can look at fatigue and address it. And we'll talk tactically about how you can use these to manage your unsubscribe rate in a bit. But just to introduce them or reintroduce them for some of you who are familiar, the first is relevancy. And that's basically ensuring that the messages that your audience is receiving, and not just segments of your audience, but each individual within your CRM database that you're marketing to, is receiving communications that are relevant for them, things that they would be interested in. So, products that they would be willing to purchase, for example, willing and able, that they're in the market for. And the reason that's important is because there's tons of metrics that I could spout right now. You can Google it, but study after study after study shows that irrelevant advertising, whether it's acquisition or CRM, is not effective. It causes people, one, to not pay attention to your advertising, which can also hurt your campaigns in the future, because once people are sort of trained not to pay attention to your messaging, then they're going to be less likely to pay attention in the future. But it actually can go further than just causing sort of like individuals to ignore your messaging. It actually can cause annoyance or irritation with your advertising, which is not obviously a good thing for a marketer.
Yeah, and we were talking about a study earlier this week that a lot of marketers do personalization and think personalization and think to provide a good experience to their user, and the user surveyed think it's not personalized and really not accurate. It's not relevant for them. So there is a gap into that, and that should be, as you said, at the individual level. And Matt, so you said two ways. That was the first one. What would be the second?
Yeah, the second one is exactly what you were talking about just a minute ago, Ben, and that's around pressure. So keeping an eye on the frequency. And we get asked a lot around, like, what's the optimal average frequency that I should be sending my campaigns out? And for those of you who have listened to some of our podcasts on the topic in the past, you know that we're pretty firmly grounded in the idea that there isn't one, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But it is important to pay attention to the number of messages your audience is receiving, and so the second consideration is really around pressure, or the number of messages that an individual is receiving in any given time period. And this is challenging to keep an eye on for a couple of reasons. Like, one, fatigue, as we mentioned, is an emotional response. So the average amount of messages that I may have a tolerance for is going to be different than every single person in your database. And that's why segments can be problematic, because it's still assuming that individuals have like the same appetite for frequency, and they don't. Everybody's different. And to add an even more complicated layer on top of it, relevancy is directly related to pressure in terms of managing fatigue, because if you're sending out, somebody may have a tolerance for receiving 10 very relevant messages in a week. It's possible, whereas they don't want to receive one irrelevant message. Yeah. And the next person could be very different. And then in terms of what each individual perceives as being relevant is also different. So that's why this individualized approach to CRM marketing is so important to keep in mind, because this relationship between relevancy and pressure as it relates to managing and reducing your unsubscribe rate is a really important thing to consider.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, let's ring a bell of a discussion we had some weeks ago with a CRM team. That's just share with us what was their, not their strategy, but their practice today. And when you hear the number they shared, that I won't disclose, but the result of the size of the database and the number of total message sent per week results to an average of 20 touch points per user per week across all channels, because we are talking about relevancy, frequency, and pressure. That's need to be considered as multi-channel, multi-touch, not only individual channel by channel, and at a focus level for the communication channel. You need to look at the individual in the center to be customer centric. So having your customer at the center of the calculation, but all the channels are not equal. The fatigue that they will get is based on the content, but also the content cross the channel, because the same content may be relevant for the individual, but maybe not by text. That's maybe it's not super urgent. That's something that they want to hear about, but there is the urgency of receiving a text message to look at your offer or the product you want to promote. Maybe an email that they will be able to check later in the day will be better. It really depend on your business, the products, and how all of that works. But
Yeah.
again, frequency, pressure, when you reach a limit. What make me say that, Matt, is you said that, and we align in the fact that there is no correct answer to what's the number of ideal message ideal number of message per week or per days per user. But even if that's relevant, there is a threshold that feels like it's a little bit too much when you hear that people can receive more than 20 messages a week for some brands.
Yeah. So as a marketer, is the answer that I, sort of identify, that like, customers potentially who have the capacity to receive more messages, or potentially segment by those who I might identify as receiving a certain type of message, and then based on that, just frequency cap it each week. Is that, that's what we hear is sort of like a big tactic for a lot of marketers. Is that potentially the right approach, or is there a different way to think about it?
And the first, to mitigate the fatigue, the relevancy is important, definitely. But if you if you consider the plan, the communication plan for the week, when you send the message will be important. But when the accurate content, or the content some individual will have propensity or interest for, might come later in the week. So the way you manage the fatigue, the way you reduce the fatigue or have a better distribution of the message to maximize or reduce the fatigue, to maximize the positive impact of your communication, will also be driven by the way you manage the pressure in your tool. Because if we take the example of a classic usual plan of 5 campaigns during the week, and at maximum, as a marketer, I would wish to send 3 messages to maximum 2 users. The issue can be that you send messages earlier in the week to people with not really a big interest for the topic, and unfortunately they won't receive the communication they have high propensity for, because maybe they are scheduled at the end of the week. So that's really important to bring in this interest propensity for the content, in order to, as you said, reduce the unsubscribe and reduce the fatigue. But that's not easy, because most of the tools today are just built to deliver message. I mean, that's first come, first serve. So if you segmented a group of people and not work on the individual level, and you send already 3 messages for your segments, or the one segment in particular, anyone with an interest for content later in the week after the 3 message won't receive it due to the cap. And that's really something not so easy to manage in a marketing cloud of nowadays, because they are not built for that.
Yeah. So I think, like, kind of diving more deeply into these a little bit in terms of tactical, like, what's the best way for marketers now to essentially reduce their unsubscribe rate? And again, like, relevancy and pressure are very much related. So kind of like thinking specifically a little bit about relevancy first. The best way to think about it is relevancy, again, on the individual level. So in terms of like segmentation, you're still grouping, even if you have 20, 30, 50, 100 segments, if there's 2 million customers in your database, that's a lot of customers that you've grouped into like clusters. And as we were discussing before, every single individual's appetite for frequency, or the number of messages that they're able to receive, is different. And it's also different dependent upon how relevant the communications are. So starting with relevancy, if you optimize relevancy for each individual within your database, you're automatically going to reduce fatigue by increasing the appetite for messages received. So I think it's really important to think about that. So like obviously, if you're sending out campaigns that are consistently relevant to your audience, they're going to be way more likely to engage with you. So their appetite for frequency goes up. So that's one thing I think to think about. And in terms of relevance, I think it's really important to think about, there's lots of ways to talk about relevance. Is the subject line relevant? And, some of those things are very important. But I think the key is to really understand what it is, to understand the demand within your data and what each individual customer is essentially looking for or in market for, and making sure that you're delivering content that's focused around that specific demand, that's customized to each individual. And you can do this because we've talked about this a lot, but the most valuable asset any marketing team has is their CRM, their first party data. And all of that data can tell you, even if it's somewhat unlabeled or unstructured, it can still tell you a lot of information about what each individual customer within your database may be interested in. And once you know that information, you can make sure that when you're pushing out 5, 6, 10 offers in any given week, that the customers that are included in each of those campaigns are the most relevant for that particular offer, that it'll be for things that they want to buy. And the best way, obviously, to be able to do that is to take advantage of machine learning and then scale it through AI capabilities. And that can tell you everything you need to know about each individual's consumer's appetite and demand. And once you're able to do that, you can create relevant experiences by making sure those 10 different campaigns have the right audiences in each given week.
Yeah, and just making a quick pause on what you said, Mats. For marketers that are listening to the podcast, yes, we are seeing that a lot, that your first-party data is key. There is a ton of information that you can leverage in the first-party data to provide a better experience, to reduce the fatigue and really send communication to the right audience with the content they are looking for, or the offer they are looking for. There are some challenges, technical challenges to implement that. It depends on how it's organized, how the IT is organized, how the data is structured in your company. But I just wanted to pause to mention that the more challenging thing to achieve that is just the marketers, the marketing team, or people in the company that think that the gut feel is better than what the data will say. So fighting why we are still stuck with everyone wants to do segmentation and big segment. I said that you can have 5 or 20 segments. That's still putting a bunch of people in a box and saying that, oh, they behave the same way. No, they change. Everything changed. Every individual and will behave differently over time and will react differently to your communication, and they can't be stuck in a box. Even if you have dynamic segmentation that will make some people move from one segment to the other segments every week, every 2 weeks, whatever, that's not enough compared to what technology can let you do today. But that is the result of marketers' gut feel that will design these boxes. It's because someone navigates on your website on one category, on a specific category for 2 times, that they will be flagged with a label and receive for the next 5 months content about this category. I mean, that can be relevant for some of them, but you can't put 500,000 people in this category just because 500,000 of people navigate on a specific category in your website last month. And again, that's internal education, and it's not easy. That's a challenge, and that's why I really wanted to highlight that there is a technical challenge, but that's not the big, the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge on moving on from segmentation to individualization.
Yeah, and I think it's a good kind of segue into the next section. You mentioned, like a lot of the barriers within the marketing team itself, and sort of changing the ways that they kind of think about CRM and marketing in general. And again, like kind of just to bring this up again, we've been asked in so many conversations with marketers, through your technology, can you tell us what the optimal average frequency for any given campaign might be? Like what should we frequency cap it at? Like, what does this look like across channels? And so kind of in consideration with what we've been saying about relevancy, and specifically relevancy as it relates to the individual on the product level, how should marketers then consider pressure and frequency? Is that become completely irrelevant, or is that something they should continue to think about? Is there an average frequency they should be trying to achieve? Or really, how now that we understand a little bit more around how relevancy can impact the reception of messages and fatigue, like how does pressure sort of relate to that?
And that's a good question, and that's again, there is no easy answer to that. To me, there are different factors that will help to navigate with this information. The first one is tied to the brand. So the positioning of your brand will also dictate a little bit that maximum number of touch points per week or per month for each individual. And if you are in the luxe industry, the tolerance of sending more message to clients the luxe brands, the brand in the luxe industry will be a little bit more careful on that. Big discounters won't look at that the same way. But even for luxury brands, that if you are relevant, you can increase this pressure because the fatigue won't be you won't generate fatigue, but that's to be increased over time. That you can, if you are relevant, or if you reapply a tactic to be more relevant for each individual, you might send lower volume for each campaign. But the benefit of that, the long-term benefit of sending less message, less total message on your database, is the fact that people who will receive them will receive messages that are more relevant. So generating less fatigue, and they will be able to receive more message. That's, at the end of the day, will generate more revenue for you. So that's not so obvious, but sending less message over time will help you to generate more revenue because the customer lifetime value will increase. They will increase. I mean, I know that's the Apple MPP make that a little bit more difficult, but the open rate will be better, even if you can't measure it. But the open rate will be better. The click-through rate will be better. The conversion will be better. And if your consumer receive a series of 5, 10, 20 messages that are all relevant, then they will continue to say, okay, when I receive a message, that's always relevant for me. So I will keep opening it and having a look because I know that this brand is really taking care of the message they sent very well because they match what I'm expecting to receive from them. And yeah, that's a long play. That's not if you look at the short term play and keep looking at results on the short timeline, you won't see an impact. But again, your database it's really, the goal for the company, for the business on the long term. That's a long play. That's really CRM will impact. So that's where you need to keep the focus.
Yeah, and I think the long play too is a really good thing to talk about a little bit too, because I think like one thing that is like utterly shocking to me that we hear all the time is, and even some experts in the industry and people who, you know, are like CRM thought leaders have said this, and I think it's a really weird way to look at things, but the idea that unsubscribes just represent customers who wouldn't buy from you anyway, like let them go. You know, it's focus on the ones that are there, that care, that engage, and let the ones that want to leave go. It's not a big loss in value, and I think that is hugely problematic for a couple different reasons. One is like, think about your 401k. Obviously, you're investing every single month, and there's something called compound interest, which is great, right? It's interest that you earn each month, and then you earn interest on the earnings that you earn from the interest of previous months. So it gets more and compounds and gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger over time. Well, your unsubscribe rate's exactly the same thing, only it's a negative value. Even if your percent is tiny for every month or every campaign that you send out, over time, it's going to compound into something massive.
Yeah.
And that massive number of unsubscribes represents a huge loss in not just immediate revenue for each individual campaign that you're sending out, but in terms of customer lifetime value over time. So, I mean, those unsubscribes essentially, to me, like, you're not going to be able to stop every single person. You're not going to get your unsubscribe rate down to zero, but you want to get it as close to zero as possible, because again, over time, that's a huge loss in value. And so I think like the idea that let them go, it's okay, focus on the ones that are engaging, like those are missed opportunities. And those individuals likely had signed up to receive your newsletter or engaged with you at some point in the past. So there is interest there, and that can't be ignored. So I think relevancy, again, is really important. And you can use that as a tool to engage customers that would normally unsubscribe from you. And so I think like that's a really interesting thing to think about. And ultimately, you know, customer lifetime value is going to decrease on average over time, if that's not something you're thinking about.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, you were saying that's mentioning that's let's people unsubscribe, they would not buy. The thing that's a part of the unsubscribe are just generated by you. That just you are sending too much irrelevant message that just push them to leave. I mean, in the first place, if you did not buy a list on internet or whatever, they came to your store, to your brand.
Yeah,
they subscribe. They had touch point. They had interaction with your brand. So there was some sign of the beginning of a relationship, and you just destroyed the relationship because you were irrelevant, too much insistent or whatever.
Yeah.
And so that's, as you said, it's not true. That's people who unsubscribe. It's not a big deal. That's better to have them unsubscribe. Yeah. If they have an issue with your brand, I prefer to have people unsubscribe that just not opening or not interacting at all. But that's a total different topic on another part of the unsubscribe, which are just generated by the poor quality of what you are sending.
Yeah. And I mean that whole snowball effect where your unsubscribes are, you know, even if you have a smaller rate that you can potentially reduce, like those unsubscribes are going to have to be made up. Like nobody's going to be happy with you in your business if your database is shrinking. So obviously, what does that cause? It causes acquisition costs to go way up. And those are increasingly expensive as it becomes more and more difficult to target, as consumer fatigue becomes even more of an obstacle, especially in a world now where everything is so digital. So I think your CRM database, again, is your most valuable asset. That is where there's tons of revenue within that without you needing to go out. And I'm not saying don't acquire new customers, but without you needing to go and try to not just acquire net new customers, but also make up for the ones that have left your database previously. So not only is there a revenue loss, there's also an increase in cost associated with it as well to think about. So I think it's just, we want to keep those numbers as low as possible. We want to create individualized experiences, and we want to make sure that people are receiving the right number of messages so that over time you're not spending budget in other areas to acquire them back or to acquire new customers, or losing lifetime value of your database because there's unsubscribes that you're losing that you could easily keep if you just, focused on creating relevant messaging at a manageable level of pressure.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the all unsubscribe thing that was our first episode of the podcast 1 year ago. We have a simulator that's an Excel sheet that you can input the size of your database, number of message campaign you are sending per week or per month, and an average unsubscribe rate you have. And you can simulate the impact over time after 1 year on your database, and also simulate and see the impact, the number of people you would keep in the database if you just reduce the unsubscribe by, I don't know, 5% or 10%. And in general, people are shocked by the volume. I mean, reducing from 0.1% of unsubscribe per campaign to 0.09% of unsubscribe per campaign at the end of the year, that's a big deal. That can be hundreds of thousands of people that are still receiving your campaign if they are relevant again.
Yeah, compounding is a great thing if you're looking to make money, but it's also a very, very bad thing if it's going the negative direction. So
exactly.
Yeah, definitely check that out. I think you'll be surprised as to what the numbers will show.
Yeah, I'm checking our notes. I think we covered all the topic we wanted to cover today.
I think so.
That was a great chat. Again, if you have ideas, topics that you want us to cover, explain, get more in detail, don't hesitate to contact us. That's we will be happy to touch base on that.
Yeah, challenge us as well. I mean, if there's something we're saying that you disagree with, or that you have a different point of view on, or a different experience with, we'd love to hear from you as well. I mean, these are the types of points that sort of enrich the discussions that we have. So obviously, we're willing not just to hear from people who agree, although we love that, but also those of you who are questioning. We'd love to hear from you as well, so we can address the other side on future discussions.
Great. Talk to you next week.
See you next week.
Bye.